Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about the Tony Blinken's U.S.-led order, rules-based order, whatever a euphemism they use for imperialism and for total world domination. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and we're going to talk about Tony Blinken's rules-based international order. At times, he uses the term U.S.-led order, and we've had an ICJ ruling. Let's talk about the dynamics, the new set of dynamics that are created here. So let's start with this: the rules-based international order. It's something that Tony Blinken uses interchangeably with the term U.S.-led world order. Both of them are saying the same thing, right? And in a nutshell, let's kind of distill it down to what he's really saying. The United States is 4% of the world's population. So what Tony Blinken is saying is that 4% of the world's population should lead the other 96%, should be in charge of the other 96%. And the question has to come out as to why? Well, we can discuss that. People have a lot of various reasons. Some have to do with race or religion. Some have to do with the theft of resources, etc. But at this point, the reasoning behind that are irrelevant. Let's talk about the practical application of the rules-based order and how it's affected by the ICJ, the international, the court for the ICJ, the International Court for Justice, whatever the hell it is. You know what I mean? The ICJ. Okay. Bottom line is that this rules-based international order is simply a way of Tony Blinken stating world domination in a way that he can bamboozle the American people and the people of Europe into believing that it is, as usual, liberal interventionism, right? We can do war. We can do all kinds of terrible things under the guise of we're doing it for a good reason, rules-based. There are rules. Now, in fact, if you have a rules-based system, what you need to have, if you are genuine in saying that there are rules, is access to the rules. What do people want, right? They want transparency. What are the rules? Where can we find them? How can we read them? How are they interpreted? What do they mean, right? A rules-based system is only present if the rules are available. If it's a transparent system, that means it's rules-based, right? Okay, if somebody says, if you go get it, let's say you get a job and you go there and the people say, okay, we got a set of employee rules. What are they going to do? They're going to give you an employee rules handbook. You can read that. You can find out what your rights are. You can find out what you can and can't do at work. You can find out oftentimes what are fireable offenses. If you have a complaint, it'll tell you how you file a complaint with whom. All of the rules are there. It's a rules-based system, and you're going to get an employee handbook that gives you the rules, right? That's what we expect. The rules-based international order, the first question that's asked by people are, where can I find the rules? If you're asking for the rules of the rules-based international order, it already demonstrates that you don't understand the nature of the beast that's saying rules-based order, right? The reason that they call it a rules-based international order is because specifically there are no rules. It is simply a lie. It is simply people who can't tell you the truth because you would know that what they're doing is pure evil, that what they're doing is a self-serving racket. The rules-based international order simply means this: I can do anything I want, anytime I want, because I have the power to do it. Because I have the economic power, because I have the military power, I can do what I want. I can commit genocide after genocide, which they have. You could look up genocide after genocide. You know, one of the things that kills me about people, I'm not, this is not in favor or against any ideology. I'm simply saying, when you make an argument, it has to have some practicality in the real world, right? You have to be able to say, I'm opposed to libertarianism because of this. I'm opposed to socialism, communism, whatever, because of this. I'm opposed to capitalism because of that. Make an argument that says, I'm opposed to this, and make it a strong and credible argument. One of the most absurd arguments against socialism and communism is they kill people. What about all the people they kill? And I just say, you can't count. Human beings are going to kill other people. Can you count? Do we count the people in Vietnam? I mean, start with the United States. Do we count the people in Vietnam that they killed? Do we count the people in Korea? Just start since World War II. Do we count the people in Korea that they killed? Do we count the people in South America that we killed? Do we go through through Africa, and do we go through murder after murder? Do we go through the 10, 12 million people in India that England killed? I mean, we will be here. This will be a long show if I start talking about the number of people that were killed by capitalist countries. So the preposterous, absurd argument that somehow there's any ideology that could exist that would be more brutal, vicious, murderous than the colonialist and the imperialist ideologies of Europe and the United States is preposterous. Come up with another argument, but don't come up with an argument against any ideology that could say they'd kill as many people as the Western hegemonic colonialist imperialist forces. I don't want to hear it. So what Tony Blinken is basically saying, this is not in favor of or in defense of any ideology. It is in favor of and in defense of the practical application of ideologies. If you're going to argue that one is better or worse or more brutal or more violent or whatever, right now, there's nothing in the world more brutal and violent than the United States. And people are seeing that in one of its lesser genocides. Keep in mind something, as horrible and brutal as the genocide is in Israel, this is one of the lesser genocides of the U.S. and Western rules-based and colonialist rules-based international order. This is a brushback, an elbow brushback compared to what they've been doing for, if I just say since World War II, but literally for centuries. So, you know, let's not pretend that somehow there's a competition of ideologies and somehow the least violent is the colonialist imperialist. Because when you say capitalist, you can just argue, I don't have to say that. I can say colonialism and imperialism and all that kind of stuff. So let's go continue with the US. So it's the rules-based international order at its foundation is what? At its foundation is what? It's violent, it's expansive, and it's predatory. Right? You go to countries, and if they can't stop you from taking your stuff, you take it. If they can't stop, if they can stop you, you use any means necessary. So now you say, Venezuela says we're going to do our thing the way we want to do it. This is that we're not going along with you. So what do? You try to take them out economically. Cuba, you try to take them out economically. Russia now, Iran, any country that won't do what you want, if you don't have a viable option for just taking out a knife and cutting their stinking throats, which is what you would prefer to do if you're the U.S. empire. You prefer to just kill them all and brush their bodies aside and take their stuff. But if you can't do that, then you try to use other means. And because after World War II, the United States built this international economic infrastructure, right, that to basically give them the ability to control the world's economy, to control the movement of finances around the world, and to be able to use that system as a weapon. They created an infrastructure to weaponize the international economic system. And that's part of the rules-based international order. If we really got into the rules-based international order and for what it is, as opposed to what it's put forth as, it's simple. It is, number one, the world is a hierarchy, but there are only two categories, right? Major, and that is the U.S., which is above the hierarchy. The United States is not even part of the hierarchy. The U.S. has been ordained by God to manage and control the hierarchy, right? So any rules within the hierarchy of the world, the United States does not adhere to the rules. The United States creates the rules, administers the rules, right? So the rules-based order means the US creates and administers the rules. Number one, which is now, as a result of the US being the entity that creates and administers the rules, that also means that there are no rules that could possibly apply to the administrator of the hierarchical system, right? The rules don't apply to the administrator. The administrator creates the rules. They don't read the rules and say, it's not like the US is a referee, right? What does a referee do at a game, at a football match, right? The referee says, okay, I've got a book here with all the rules, and I can throw a yellow flag or a red flag. I can do this or that. I can do things to administer the rules, to tell you the rule says this and you can't do that. The rule, you on your side, the rule says this and you can't do that. A rules-based order implies that, number one, there are rules, right, that everybody knows or should know. But number two, that there is some entity that interprets and administers those rules, that says, hey, look, the rules are there, you can or can't do that, right? So what's implied is there's a rules-based international order, and the United States is the judge, jury, and advocate. The United States, number one, interprets the rules, right? The judge may interpret the law, right? The United States interprets potential violations of the rules, right? So guess what? The jury says, hey, guilty or not guilty. The United States says guilty or not guilty. The United States then argues for or against those who are deemed to be possibly in violation of the rules. That's the advocate, that's the attorney, that's the barrister, whatever you want to call it, right? So the United States, number one, and might I add this, the law enforcement agency, right? And so if you've got a criminal justice system, you got judge, jury, and advocate, right? But out there, you also have a law enforcement agency that goes out and arrests people, that goes out and can potentially use violence. You're in violation of the rules. You have to come in to me and I'm taking you into court, right? But the person says, I'm not going. The law enforcement officer can draw, if they've got a gun, they can draw their gun. If they've got a stick, they can grab the person, wrestle with them, bop them a couple times, and take them into court. They can take them into custody, which means they can what? They can relieve the person of their liberty. They have what? They have what? They have a monopoly on violence. The state can come out and say you can or can't do this, and the state can use violence. They are final arbiter of who can and can't use violence. The state can come out and grab you, bop you over the head. If you say no, ultimately they can kill you. If you say I'm not going to do what I want, the state can shoot you, right? The state has a monopoly on violence. So the entity that's in charge of this criminal justice system has the monopoly on violence. So the U.S. they're the judge, they're the jury, they're the lawyer, the advocate, whatever you want to call it, for both sides. They're also the law enforcement agency that goes out and apprehends people. Hey, the court has said that you're in violation of the law or the rules, or that you appear to be in violation of the rules. We're going to grab you. They can grab you and bring you in. But what else can they do? Within the criminal justice system, you've got the law enforcement out there. You've got the court system out there, but you got something else, right? The penal system. Keep in mind something, I used to teach criminal justice, so I taught this. These are the main parts of a criminal justice system, right? The cops, they go out and they potentially enforce the law. They apprehend people. They interpret on the street on a day-to-day basis who may or may not be violating the law. You then come in. When they bring you in, they hand you over to theoretically the court system. But you may be already held in, if they put you in jail, the penal system, they don't really consider a holding cell part of a penal system. You haven't been, your case hasn't been adjudicated. But bottom line is the U.S. is all of this. And what happens? You go to court. The U.S. then presents its case against you. It's the prosecutor, right? Determines there is no defense. There are no defense. There's nobody to say you didn't do it. The U.S. empire grabs you, they bring you in, they prosecute you. They are also the judge, they're the jury. So they tell you what you can and can't say. Then they come out and the U.S. empire says you're guilty, right? Then the judge sentences you. The U.S.'s empire is also the judge. The judge says you can or can't do this. Then the U.S. empire becomes the penal system, right? Okay, here's what we're going to do. The judge has said this is your punishment. We're the ones that are going to exact your punishment, right? The U.S. is the any arbitrations. If you say, hey, I'm guilty, I don't think I did it, or you can't do this to me, the U.S. now becomes the arbitrator. Well, we're going to look into it. Nah, you're guilty. You got to do what the court says, and then we're going to punish you, which is how it may be military attack. It may be an economic attack using the international economic infrastructure that they've created so that they can lord over the world. So the bottom line is, any way you look at it, the U.S. empire says there is an order in the world. That order has a full system of criminal justice, a justice system, law enforcement, courts, penal system, and one entity controls all of that. One entity is the same. Can you imagine that? Look, I'll put it to you like this. If there is a law enforcement and the law enforcement bops somebody in the head, the guy's standing in the street, the law enforcement bops somebody in the head. The guy's head is bleeding. The guy then can sue the police officer in court. We've seen that. I've been parts of that, those kinds of lawsuits on many occasions, right? They can then go to court. Why? Because the court and the law enforcement are something different. The court's job now, right, is to adjudicate whether or not the law enforcement, which is part of the same criminal justice system, violated the law, whether part of their own system violated the law. See, that's one of the controversies in the United States, where people say the cops can do anything they want, and I go to court, they just let them off. They're starting to learn that there's a contradiction when the same system that sends the cops out, the same system that part of the cops are out there is tasked with monitoring and with the part of their system. The same system that the cops are in is now tasked with monitoring the cops, with evaluating whether or not they're violating the rules, and with punishing them. People are saying there's a contradiction here. We don't get justice. We're not getting justice. The cops bopped me in the head with a stick. I didn't want to do anything wrong. I'm standing on the street. They did something outside of the rules, but the justice system stands up for them. The court stands up for them, not for the citizens. So it's all one system that is self-reinforcing as opposed to help. Okay, so what do you get? That's the rules-based international order, one entity, the U.S. empire. What Tony Blinken is saying is, me, Joe Biden, Sullivan, our little crew here, since we run this whole thing in a totalitarian kind of way, right? We're the ones who decide if you did anything wrong. We're the ones who send the cops out to apprehend you. They've grabbed, like, illegally. I can name names like Alex Saab, Julian Assange, right? They have illegally grabbed people from around the world, imprisoned people around the world. Why? Because from their perspective, we're in charge of that. Julian Assange is accused of violating the laws of the United States when he wasn't in the United States. He was in another country. So you don't have jurisdiction anyway. But the U.S. empire says, yes, the rules-based international order say worldwide, anywhere on this planet, we are the police. So we can send somebody out to get you. We are the judge and jury. They sent their people over to argue in Europe. You know, they're controlling the European court system. So they're controlling Europe. And so they're the judge, they're the jury, they're the cops, they're the penal system, they're all that. That's the foundation of the rules-based international order. Now that we've got that straight, let's talk about the ICJ, because it's like the Titanic, right? If you think about the Titanic and you read about it, what happened was that it was damaged, right? And at some point, it was mortally wounded. At some point, the people who were who understood how it worked, the engineers, et cetera, who understood how it worked, apparently at some point, the captain went to the engineers and said, okay, we got a wound. How bad is it? And the engineer says it's fatal. We got 5-6 hours, however many hours, this thing's going to go down. These compartments are damaged. This amount of water's coming in. We can't block these compartments in. It's going to bring in more than we can pump out. Here's the bottom line. Here's the end result. This ship's going down. It cannot sustain itself with the wound that it has. More water's coming out. I heard one time I watched I was watching this show and they're talking to this psychopathic guy who killed a bunch of people. This guy, you want to talk about a psychopath? I'm watching the show. This guy had literally stabbed his mother and thrown her off a bridge and murdered his mother. That's a guy you probably don't want to be in this. You know, if they arrest you for something that you didn't do and throw you in a cell, you don't want to be in a cell with this guy, right? You ain't things. Don't go to sleep. Sleep with one eye open. And they asked the guy, you know, you've killed a number of people. You know, what do you have to say about that? And the guy says, you know, what did you like this? He looked at it like he had successfully completed his mission, that once he decided to kill somebody, they were gone, right? He says, let me tell you, I always feel like this if I'm going to kill somebody. So, you know, you got trouble when a guy is like casually talking about killing somebody. You know, when I kill somebody, I figure like this. And usually I stab him because that's the way I do it, right? I'm thinking, oh, God, what the hell am I watching? And he's like, I figure like this. If I put enough holes in them, they can't plug them all, right? And so he gives the old boink, 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 right? If anybody's going to, let's face it, if somebody's killing somebody with a knife, he understands what a person who has been trained in self-defense with a knife would understand. Boom, 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 boom. They'd stick a bunch of holes. They grab you and you're trying to stop it. They'll slash. But what they want to do is get to the vital areas and boom, 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 boom. You got to protect your vital areas from a knife if you're being knife attacked. It only takes an eighth of an inch, a half inch, eighth of an inch in some areas for the knife to get in and hit an organ, and you're going to bleed out. They can't save you, right? So the bottom line is, my point is that a mortal wound, we can use that metaphor, whether we're talking about a ship, whether we're talking about a human body, or in this instance, we're talking about a set of hidden rules, because that's what the rules-based order is. It's a set of hidden rules, and really it's one hidden rule, and that is that the United States, the U.S. empire, does not answer to anyone, can do anything at once. It doesn't have to answer to anyone, that it is the king of the hill, and that power is backed up by force. That assertion that the U.S. empire is in charge of everything is backed up by its ability to use either economic or military kinetic force to force its will, exact its will upon whatever entity chooses to oppose it, chooses to resist, right? And one of the important, I would say not one of the most important weapon that the empire uses, the most, number one, far more important than the economic infrastructure, far more important than the military infrastructure, is language. It's media. It's PR. It's what they say. Why? Because I've said this a million times. If the American people understood the ideology, the actions of their ruling elite, they wouldn't go along with it. They'd say, no, well, wait a minute. You told us through liberal interventionism, right? You told us we were doing it for a good reason. Now, the conservatives still use some level of liberal intervention because they'll say we're doing, they understand, even Bush understood liberal interventionism. We're doing it for a good reason. You can argue that Reagan used liberal interventionism in South America. We've got to go there to stop the communists because communism is evil. It was interventionism. It was still, we're going to invade a country. We're going to overthrow their government. We're going to murder God knows how many indigenous people in South America. We're going to end up getting their oil and their bananas and their coffee and all that stuff. But we're doing it to protect them somehow and the world from communism. It was still a form of liberal interventionism, right? So the rules-based international order is at the forefront of liberal interventionism. The world is better off. What did Tony Blinken recently say? The entire world wants the United States to lead this thing in Israel. The entire world wants us to lead, to bring peace to the Middle East, etc. Well, that's just like saying the rules-based international order. It's the opposite of rules. You're lying. We're using rules, the rules-based order. And in reality, you're using an order that says, I can do anything I want, and there are no rules for me. And there aren't any really rules for you, because if you are one of my adversaries, if you're one of my vassals, if you're under the umbrella of U.S. imperialism, right? If the U.S. empire says you can do it, you can do any damn thing you want, kill people, do whatever, no matter how bad it is. If you're under our umbrella, we now transfer to you our authority, right? We make you a steward of U.S. imperialism. And now, you now can go out, kill people, do any damn thing you want to, no matter how horrible, because we've now passed a baton to you. We've given you you're a minor executor of the rules-based order. You don't have to go by the rules, right? The rules are, if we're in power, there's no rules. You make the rules as you go, or you just say the hell with it. I ain't going to worry about the rules. And then you just come back and lie. But a big part of it is language, to say to the American people, well, we're doing it for a good reason. And ultimately, and here's the problem they're having, as this thing starts to decay, you have to now convince the American people of something much more difficult. You've got to, think about the European people, right? Now you're in a situation where the Germans are suffering like hell. Their economy is going to hell. Europe's whole economy is going through hell. The U.S. attacked and blew up Nord Stream, right? The U.K., their economy is going to hell. Poverty and misery is visiting itself upon Europe, and it's visiting itself upon here too, right? Up on the U.S. too, right? So now what you have to do is you now have a much more difficult task. It's one thing when the economy is strong, when people feel as though that their economy is better than Africa or these other, South America, these other countries that you're preying on, that you're stealing their stuff, stealing their gold, stealing their uranium, stealing all this stuff, right? So you look at it, and the people who run the thing can say, look, we're living better than they are. And you say, yeah, we are. And they say, it's because we're superior intellectually, culturally, everything. We work harder, we're superior. Well, the people of your empire then say, yeah, good, that's right. We're superior to them. That's why we're living better. They don't question that, because it feels good to believe that you're intellectually and culturally superior to the other people, right? So it's easy when the standard of living is high, to convince the schmucks in the West that their standard of living is high, not because they're robbing the hell out of those people, but because those people are somehow inferior. This is a meritocracy. The world is a meritocracy, right? But when their standard of living goes to hell, it gets much more difficult to convince them that the system they're in is good. It's right, because they feel the pain now of the rules-based international order. They start to say, wait a minute, this rules-based international order ain't working for me. So now what do you have to do? You have to use that same rules-based international order that you were using outside of the empire to quell dissent from any country that said, we don't like this. You got to turn those guns and weapons internally. So now the rules-based international order has to defend itself from Russia and China and Venezuela and Cuba and Iran and all the countries that say, no, we want independence. We don't want to be part of your cabal, right? But now you have to defend yourself from dissenters inside who say, I got a question about the lockdowns. You shouldn't be able to question the lockdowns. I got a question about what you're telling me I have to do. I have a question about why things are getting worse. Hey, wait a minute. I'm part of this country. I see a deficit going out of control. I have some questions about that. Donald Trump just said, I want to do the largest tax rate increase in the history of the United States and pretty much wipe out our economy. In all his brilliance, Trump just said, look, you make me president, I'll do a 60% tariff taxes on all things Chinese. Well, that's one of our top trading companies. Think about all the things that you buy that are Chinese. If I go to the store right now, all the stuff that I buy, all of the things that are packaged in things that come from China, on and on and on, right? 60% increase. Guess what that means? Go to Walmart, go to Amazon, everything you buy has suddenly a 60% increase. What will that do? What happens if you run a business and it's an electronic business? You sell computers, you sell computer parts, you sell whatever the hell you sell. You're buying and selling, you're building, you're making things. And all of a sudden, everything's got a 60% increase. You're wiped out. Wiped out. So we got Donald Trump now saying, hey, man, 60% increase in everything. So I'll get China. We'll fix China. I'm going to do a 60% tax increase on the people of America. Bottom line is China won't pay anything differently. Nothing differently. But the American people, because they're going to make it under the same circumstances, but once it gets here, you'll pay 60% more. Which means now the rules-based international order says we're doing that to hurt China. And you're like, you've raised the price of 60% on damn near everything I buy. Yes, you have to suffer so that we can hurt China. So that, now think about this. Think about the argument here, the logic here. The United States wants to be supreme over China. We want to have this rules-based order. We want to be in control of everything. China's a threat. Oh, how are you going to fix this? Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to raise the price of damn near everything in the United States by 60%. Yes, well, that'll wipe out us. Yes, but it'll also hurt China, the working class. Yeah, but it'll also hurt China. And that's what we're trying to do, hurt China. You know what you're now saying? That you're going to sacrifice the working class. You're going to sacrifice my standard of living so you can hurt China. And who benefits? Cui bono, Sonny Bono, I don't know, whatever the hell, Sonny and Cher. Who benefits? What you're saying is we want to hurt China because they're going to hurt the rules-based order. Our ruling elite won't be in charge of everything. We're going to raise the prices of everything by 60% so that our ruling elite can maintain power and China won't have that much power. So China gets hurt. What about our working class? Well, hell, everything's going up by 60%. They'll be pretty much wiped out. Okay, who benefits? Our ruling elite will still have power and authority around the world. So now they're saying we're going to sacrifice China's economy, 1.4 billion people. Screw them. They're going to get hurt, devastated. What about the American people? Screw them too. We're going to sacrifice their economy. They're going to get wiped out. The only people that will technically benefit here is the ruling elite of the United States and the ruling elite of the UK. They're willing now. The rules-based international order says now they're going to wipe out the working class. They're in the process of wiping out the working class in Europe, and those poor bastards in Europe got a blue and yellow flag hanging out their window. So the people of Europe have simply said, "Here I am, screw me over." And if you say that, then you're probably going to get screwed. Say the U.S. empire, you're probably going to get screwed over. But guess what? You get a blue and yellow flag to hang out your window. Oh, lucky you. And you get to say, I hate Putin. And guess what? When some Russian person says, hey, they're going to have a piano concert. What is it? Nikolai something or other. Oh, my God, you can't do a piano concert with Russian. Get him out of here. Let's all go protest this Russian piano. Because you're really going to hurt Putin if you don't read Dostoevsky. Oh, Putin's sitting there crying. Oh, my God. They're not reading Dostoevsky anymore. We're screwed, right? So your ruling elite gets you in this kind of mindset that somehow you're hurting Putin if you turn your heat down in your house and freeze your ass off. You're hurting Putin. So now the job of the rules-based order now is to convince the people inside the U.S. empire that it's best if they suffer like hell so that the ruling elite can advance whatever twisted ideals they have, right? Okay. We're on a long way to go to the ICJ. I'm going to set this thing up and run off at the mouth for a while. Let's go to the ICJ. The International Court of Justice recently ruled pretty clearly that, people say Israel, and I'll make this argument, ain't no such thing as Israel. Israel is an imperial. It is a, what's the term I want to look for? A military outpost of the U.S. empire. That's all it is. As Joe Biden said, if Israel did not exist, we'd have to create it to address our interest in the region. So Israel, that people, whoa, Israel controls the United States. Well, there are some incestuous things going on here. But have you ever seen, Israel controls the United States, right? So AIPAC is Israel. But let me ask you this. Have you ever seen the military industrial complex have a problem with AIPAC? Hey, we don't like AIPAC. They're doing something that's going to make us a fortune. The military industrial complex, right? And oh, they put all of this money into Congress, right? So AIPAC is disturbed. Well, you ever heard Congress complaining? No, because the members of Congress, number one, they get lots of money from AIPAC / military industrial complex. Number two, um, they AIPAC, those who go along with the game, AIPAC helps them keep their seat. And those who don't, they get rid of them and bring in somebody that will and help them keep their seat. So if you're in Congress, if you're willing to go along with AIPAC, which you are, then they're going to help keep your seat. So while AIPAC controls Congress, Congress ain't complaining about that because they get their pockets full. God only knows they get a free ride to Epstein Island on Epstein's plane, where they can do unthinkable things that would make all of us, vomit if we had any clue what they were doing. They get everything they want through AIPAC. So AIPAC's not controlling a Congress in a way that Congress is unhappy with. It is an incestuous relationship where AIPAC controls people who want to be controlled. They want money. They don't care. Look, a sex worker, prostitute, whatever, right? It's not that they enjoy the sex, but they don't mind the sex because they may not even like it, but they like the money even more. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't people who are held against their will, but I'm saying a person who voluntarily goes out and says, I want to be a sex worker, they've already decided I'm going to do this act and I'm going to get money and I'm okay with doing this act. If a voluntary sex worker, as it is, like a legal, in Nevada or something where it's legal, or Amsterdam, whatever, right? You got a person, ideally, who hasn't been beaten and captured, who says, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to get X in return, and I'm okay with that because I want X in return. They've made that decision. Well, that's Congress. Congress, people are pretending like Congress is a victim of it. They own Congress, like Congress is a victim of AIPAC. They're the most willing victim you'll ever see in your life. Are you a victim? And literally, if they don't have any money, I guarantee members of Congress are calling AIPAC. Hey, AIPAC, yeah. You want me to vote in your favor for everything, don't you? Certainly we do. I need some more money. Okay. How much? $1 million. It's coming. It's an incestuous relationship. It is not an adversarial relationship. A lot of people try to pretend as though the AIPAC's manipulation and control of Congress is based on an adversarial relationship where Congress, I love this, they don't have the backbone to fight, push back against AIPAC. That implies that they have the inclination to push back against AIPAC. It implies that they would, if it wasn't that they're so sold out, if they weren't afraid of losing their jobs, they would push back against AIPAC. No, they want AIPAC's money and they're happy to do whatever AIPAC tells them. And AIPAC's getting money from the military industrial complex, from Zionist billionaires, blah, blah, blah. So what you have is, put it to you like this: bees and flowers. No bees, no flowers, no flowers, no bees. If all the bees disappeared tomorrow, the flowers would die. They wouldn't be pollinated. If all the flowers disappeared, and all of the bees would go, because there would be nothing for them to gather their stuff that they gather, right? What does that mean? That means that bees and flower are a field of activity. They're a symbiotic field of activity. They all work together. Without one, you don't have the other. You see where I'm going? You can't say those darn flowers are taking advantage of the bees. The poor bees. Or vice versa, can you? It is a field of activity. It all works together. One can argue that a tree is a field of activity, right? You've got leaves out here that are gathering sun. You've got the blood of the tree, which is the sap. You've got the bark that is protecting the inner part. You got the feeder part that goes out. Those are the roots, and that brings in nutrition and communicates with other trees and utilizes fungi network in the forest. You could go on and on and on. But what you have in the tree is a field of activity. What you have in the forest is a field of activity. These things are field. You could argue the whole planet, the whole universe, it's a field of activity. It all works together, right? Therefore, AIPAC, the military industrial complex, the president, these things are a field of activity. Now I can say, is Israel manipulating the U.S.? Or is it a field of activity? Is my hand manipulating my brain? It's all one. So you now have a rules-based international order that at its front, at its head, is a field of activity, an ideology of empire that works through the ruling elite. And then you've got, whether it's AIPAC, Israel, and these other outlets, these other imperial outlets around the world, they're all one. Now let's go here. The International Criminal Justice did, the Court of Criminal Justice did something. What they said was this. What South Africa said was this. It was a simple claim. There are a set of rules, international law, and everybody has to adhere to them. And we are not going to accept your argument of a rules-based international order where you make the rules and you don't have to adhere to any set of rules other than the ones that you make up and adjust on the fly. And that you also argue, U.S., that you can create stewards for your rules-based international order, such as, or extensions like an octopus, tentacles out there, such as Israel. And you can say, because this is a policy tool, because that's what it is. Israel is a policy tool of the United States. They utilize Israel, as Joe Biden said, we utilize Israel to address our interests in the region. And if they didn't exist, we'd have to create it. Israel's a policy tool for the empire, a policy tool for the ruling elite, right? So what you're saying, what South Africa said is no more, no more. You can no longer give your stewardship to these people and say they can do anything they want because we can do anything we want. And South Africa is now saying, and how about this, the United States, we're comparing a complaint against you. And we're going to put that, give that, but go to do the same thing with you. So what we're going to say is, what they're saying is the rules-based international order is dead. And what makes it dead? What gives them the foundation to say that? Well, because already the United States, and what's happened, they've already gone to the international body of jurisdiction and said the U.S. empire's vassal, the U.S. empire's tentacle extension is violating the rules and they need to be held accountable. Now, everybody knew that Israel and the U.S. aren't going to give up on a rules-based international order like that. So now they've been confronted head on, right? Everybody knows what Israel say. Are you kidding me? We are under the umbrella of the U.S. empire. And you have the nerve to tell us what we can and can't do? I'm sorry, we make the rules. There's a rules-based international order. We don't have to listen to you. And so immediately, what did what is it? Ben Gavir tweeted. The International Court of Justice is anti-Semitic. What did that mean? It means I don't care. It doesn't really mean they're anti-Semitic. It means I can come up with any excuse I want. That's the one we traditionally use, that you're anti-Semitic. We're going to just use the general, the general catch-all phrase. They're anti-Semitic. People are arguing, well, what does that mean? As though he really meant they were anti-Semitic. Well, how so? How can it be? No, don't argue over that. No, he did not mean it was anti-Semitic. Here's what he said. We can do any damn thing we want. And traditionally, when somebody challenges us, that's what we say. And so watch this. You're anti-Semitic. Ha, 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 ha. We say it all the time. We said it again, and there's nothing you can do. See ya. Wouldn't want to be you. That's what Ben Gavir is saying, right? The United States, on the day that the Friday, when the ICJ released their findings, the United States on the exact same day said, we're going to stop funding UNRWA, which is the UN. The bottom line is this: it's a UN group that provides food and humanitarian assistance to Palestinians, including Palestinians in various camps around and refugee camps and all that stuff, right? So the U.S. says we're not giving them any money anymore on the same day. What was that message? So think about this. The the ICJ, International Criminal Court of Justice, comes out and says, look, U.S. is wrong. Israel's wrong. And here's what they said. Let me interpret to it. Clearly, we don't recognize the rules-based international order. We don't recognize the U.S.-led order. The U.S. can't do any damn thing they want and pretend to and just ignore international law. That's what the International Court of Justice said. Forget the rules-based order. There's a rules-based order in front of them. They jabbed it in a heart with a knife. They just said nobody would say this. For decades, nobody would say this. since the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, someone has said, we are not going to recognize the rules-based international order. No longer. It's over. We're going to recognize international law. So what we have now is a conflict between international law and the US-led world order. Now, that's why Tony Blinken made the statement. The entire world wants the United States to resolve this issue, to address this issue in Israel. What he's saying is the International Court, the UN, none of them have your jurisdiction here. So it's like the world wants us to fix that. That doesn't mean the world wants us to fix it. That means our position is that the world has no say. That all we have to say is this is what the world wants. The world doesn't have a say. The world doesn't have standing to say no, we don't. When we say this is what the world wants, the world will bow their heads and say yes, sir. It isn't that this is really what the world says. It's that we have the authority to speak for the world. So Tony Blinken, hey, International Criminal Court of Justice, hey, you guys can't do this. The world wants us to resolve this. It is, and now we have a conflict between international law. And you could see this coming because all along, Russia and China have been saying international law, we forget this Rubio stuff. International law is what we recognize. This is what the world should recognize. And the US said, no, the rules-based order. And now South Africa, which I would suspect that they are the leading edge of BRICS, that the BRICS nation said, we can't get where we need to be. We can't do what we need to do if the rules-based international order is here. We can't have that. We got to stop this damn thing. And I think BRICS looked at this and said, this is number one, we have a moral obligation under international law to ensure that these people, that the Israel, the US empire, through its extension, Israel, stops committing a genocide. So we've got a moral obligation. But number two, we're now going to take on the rules-based international order. So this is BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China. Well, I don't know so much about India, but you get my point. The global South, the third world, the world majority, saying to the U.S. in writing, we will not accept the rules-based international order. Forget it. Them days are over. That dog don't hunt no more. Let's find out how this is going to work. So now what they're saying is this. We're going to look, you think that you're the judge, jury, executioner, advocate, the criminal penal system, you're all of that. We're going to find out because we're going to go to what you claim to recognize. They're going to expose. First of all, they expose the U.S. You claim to recognize the UN. You go to the UN and file complaints. You go to the UN and do this and that. So you claim to recognize the UN and international law. You say that other people violated international law. You're claiming to recognize international law. No more sitting on the fence. Either you're going to have to recognize the UN and you're going to have to recognize international law, or you just have to come out and say, we're a rogue state. We're out of here. We don't do that anymore. In fact, Shahid Bolson over at Middle Nation, while I don't agree with him on everything, I think he's brilliant and he makes some great points. He makes the point that Israel and the U.S. should be jettisoned, thrown out of the UN. There's an argument to be made for that eventually. I think we're getting to that point. I would argue that not at this point. At this point, you use the United States to push them up to the edge. I mean, use the United Nations to push them to the edge. You force their hand. That's what they're doing. The rules-based international order is wounded. It's like it's like the Titanic. There's too much water coming in. They can't pump it all out. They're going to go to the bottom. Here's the thing about it. Here's the problem they have. They claim to recognize the authority and jurisdiction of the UN, where there's pretty much all the nations of the world, right? So now what South Africa did was it made a logical and epistemological argument, right? Based on data and facts. This is what we know. The U.S. through Israel and the U.S. are violating international law. Based on these data and facts, empirical data, an epistemological argument. This is true, and we can prove that it's true. We know they're violating, and this is how we know it. Here's the evidence. Here's concrete evidence. There's physical evidence. There's all manner of evidence, right? They presented that. So now the rules-based international order is not based on epistemology. It's not based on empirical evidence and data. It's based on rhetoric and lies. It's based on catchphrases and sound bites and narratives. That's what it's based on, because it's all a pack of lies based on an argument that says we got the most money, we control the economic system, we got the biggest military, we can force everybody to do what we want to do. That's what it's founded in. So now there is we have an unbelievable time, an incredible time, where the U.S. is, they got to poop or get off the pot, as they say. So now what happens? This thing's going to go to the UN Security Council. Does the United States recognize the UN? They've gone to the UN Security Council. They've pitched arguments for the UN Security Council before. They've said the UN Security Council should do this or that. So the U.S. has utilized the UN Security Council. So now are they going to say the UN Security Council has no say? We don't recognize their authority. Well, you recognized it when you used it. And now, yeah, they can veto it, but it can go to the general body, and so there will be a bunch of votes. Everybody gets to vote. Now, what happens when the majority votes against the U.S.? The U.S. says, I don't want it this way. And the U.S. says, you guys have voted against us. What are we going to do now? Well, the U.S. is then put in a position where, and I suspect they will be in that position, where the U.S. will just say, we're not recognizing your authority. We don't have to listen to you. Now, in law, there is a concept called estoppel. I'm not going to get into it in depth, but here's what I'll say. For the purpose of this argument, you can't utilize something and then come back and argue against it, right? You can't say, I'm going to use the Security Council because I recognize that the Security Council has authority over Russia and China. So I'm going to go to the Security Council, and the Security Council is going to say this or that against Russia or China. And if Russia and China doesn't do it, I'm then going to go to the Security Council and say, you should take action against Russia or China. You should, they've used the Security Council and the UN against North Korea, right? North Korea has to do this. Otherwise, they should be sanctioned. Right. So the U.S. goes to the UN Security Council. They got to be sanctioned. I'm sure that there are countries now that are sorry that they didn't sanction all of that stuff and defend North Korea. But whatever the case, the U.S. goes and says, we'll utilize the Security Council to sanction North Korea. We'll have votes in the General Assembly of the UN to sanction North Korea. So what the U.S. is saying is, we will use international law. We will use this particular body to go after our adversaries. Okay, that's what you did. Now the body comes and says, one of your allies, Israel, that same body that you used to go after Russia or China, or you use it to go after Iran, you used it to go after Cuba, you used it to go after all your adversaries. You used the Security Council to argue that the Security Council had jurisdiction over this person, and the Security Council had the legal authority to sanction this country, this person, whoever. Right, that the UN General Assembly could vote against this. So you have clearly demonstrated that you recognize the authority of international law, the foundation of international law, and that the United Nations is the body that has the authority, the ability, the strength, and the duty to interpret international law and to mete out punishment, to penalize those who have violated international law. Look. The UN Security Council, the United States can do that, and we're going to use that. That's what you've done, U.S., over and over again. Now, when the UN rules against you, and they say, look, your ally's doing something wrong, and we say they got to stop. Will the U.S. then say, we no longer recognize the same body that we have used over and over and over to exact our policies on our adversaries? Now that that body says we do something wrong, we don't respect it anymore. We're not going to go along with it. The concept of estoppel says you can't utilize this body as long as it benefits you, and then come back and say, oh, I used it last month, it was great, it worked fine, and they're all in charge. And now the same body comes back and say, you violated, I don't recognize that body anymore. Why? They're completely absurd. They're ridiculous. They have no authority. The concept of estoppel says you can't do that, that is not legal. That's the, now, let me say this. In US law, in legal philosophy, right, that term is there, that concept is there, right? But even when that term and concept doesn't exist, people intuitively expect that hypocrisy, that contradiction to be dealt with. Because even if you didn't have the concept of estoppel, even if you didn't have that, then people would still look at the hypocrisy and the contradiction and say, wait a minute, whoa. Didn't you use the UN Security Council and the UN General Body to go after North Korea? Yeah. And this country and that country and this country? Yeah. And didn't you argue, you, the United States, didn't you go to the UN Security and argue yourself that they had the authority and the duty to go after that country over there? Yes, I did. So you recognize their authority. You recognize international law. You recognize their duty to support and to interpret international law and to mete out punishment for violators of international law, correct? Yes, until it comes to you. Once they say you have violated international law, you no longer accept, which means you never did. That is a contradictory position that South Africa has slammed the United States head on into, which means the death of the rules-based international order. You see, the rules-based international order can only exist in a clandestine manner. It can't exist above board. It can't exist in an epistemological, empirical world where people utilize data and information to make a plea or an argument, to evaluate the validity of an argument, to eventually to mete out, to determine whether or not someone is in violation based on information and data. The rules-based international order is a fraud. It's a clandestine fraud that's used for U.S. imperialism, for U.S. domination of the world. And as soon as you get to the point where people start asking, do you whether or not you're willing to adhere to the same rules that you have applied to others, whether or not you're willing to answer to the same international legal body that you have argued vociferously that other people have to answer to, you're now exposed. You're exposed and you're out there by yourself, which means the death of that, right? It means two other things. You got a bigger problem. The U.S. empire has a bigger problem than that. They got huge problems, but they got a bigger one. You got skeletons in your closet. You ever heard of the El Mozote massacre in, what was it, Guatemala, whatever, where like 500 indigenous people were murdered? You got by U.S. backed, supported, and armed crazies, right? You've got the whole issue with ISIS. Syria. What about the Syria weapons of mass destruction and the evidence that the whole Syrian weapons of mass destruction was a lie? What happens? Now, all of those people that went before the UN to Aaron Mate, the Gray Zone, on and on, all of these people that were able to go to before the UNSC and say that the US's argument that the Assad government used weapons of mass destruction, used chemical weapons against their people was a lie. That's a narrative, and that narrative holds up as long as you control the narrative. What happens? Now, Syria, or not Syria, some other country says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take that whole Syria WMD thing. We got a lot of evidence. We got people from the UN. We got people from the group that went there to evaluate the whether or not, chemical weapons were used, who came back and said, hey, we wrote up a report. And that report said that we didn't find any evidence of chemical weapons. When it got back to the people who write the report, they fired us off the case, and they brought in some people who had never even been there, and they rewrote the report to say something other than what the people on the ground, on the scene, who did the investigation saw. The people went there and did an investigation. Experts on the ground took samples, came back and said it ain't happened. You fired all of them. You brought in enough new people that were never there. And then you wrote up a report that said it did happen. What happens now? If on behalf of Assad, on behalf of the Assad government, and might I add, and the United States attacked Syria as a result of that, what happens? Now, when someone says, I'm going to go to the International Court of Justice and I'm going to present an argument against the United States for this whole Syria thing, that they attacked Syria illegally, that their sanctions against Syria are all illegal. All of this is based on an argument that Syria used weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons against their people. But the foundation is flawed because there's no evidence that they did, number one. And number two, even worse, there's significant evidence that the United States manipulated the investigation, that somebody manipulated the investigation. What happens now? Is there a statute of limitations? How about Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba? Do people start now going to the International Court of Justice for their people being murdered and assassinated? What about Haiti? The Jovenel Moise, who was the Haitian an illicit, but a Haitian prime minister was machine gun. The evidence is overwhelming that the Biden administration did it. What happens when that gets presented? What happens now when the U.S., all these horrific skeletons in their closet, all of these things that they have done, that people, instead of making the argument that the door is open now, where would you complain? Right? Where in the past, when the United States overthrew your government, murdered your people, made illegal claims against weapons of mass destruction against you, did all kind of terrible things to you, where was the jurisdiction? What venue could you approach to seek redress? There was none. What if people say, holy crap, you mean you can go to the International Court of Justice on the United States now? I'm in. Count me in, bro. And now, these people start showing up with complaint after complaint, carefully written, carefully documented, with historical evidence and patterns and people who come forward. What happens if you got this? What happens if you start bringing forward some of this WikiLeaks stuff? No wonder they had to take out Assange. So the real horror for the United States, to be quite frank, is not just that the Israeli, one of the, and I say this with great sorrow, right? One of the more minor genocides that they've involved in. They killed 2.5 million people in Vietnam. What, 800,000 or 1 million people in like Cambodia and Laos bombing? I mean, on and on and on. This is a horrific, unthinkable genocide. But in the context of this bloodthirsty, vicious, sadistic empire, just another Tuesday. Oh, well, they're sitting there like, what are they complaining about? We only killed 25,000 people so far. I mean, let's face it, 25,000 for us, that's, just a Saturday afternoon. What about the millions we killed here? What about them? What happens now when Iraq ends up? The United States can't allow Iraq to throw them out. What's going on in Iraq? The United States now has attacked Iraq over and over, and the Iraqi government saying, we want you out. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. Whether or not the Iraqi government is really, on the take and on the dole, and they're just saying that publicly, and they're really saying stay, I don't know. But let's just, for the sake of an intellectual exercise, let's just say this. What happens if the Iraqis are successful and say, you got to go? And the world, now, the next thing you know, the U.S. has set things up. So all of Iraq's oil that's sold, the money goes to the U.S., right? So you know what the U.S. is going to do. Iraq's going to say you have to go, and the U.S. is going to say, fine, we'll go. Yeah, but we're keeping all your money. You ain't getting a dime of it. They're going to rob them. And any future oil, any money that comes in, we're going to take anything we can. We're going to rob you of every dime you can. But what happens now that another door is open? If Iraq says, look, we want all of our money back and everything, and you can't take that from us. The U.S. says, you and who else's army is going to stop us? And they say, we're going to the ICJ. And they write up a 84-page document with the history of the U.S. lying, cheating, and stealing their way into attacking Iraq. They get into the history of the illegal, of all the brutality and the violence, and on and on and on. And you have some internal Iraqis that have spoken with the U.S. empire, that have had discussions with them about this, that come out and say, yeah, I'll testify. And they come in and testify, yeah, I talked with Joe Biden and he told me do this, that we know, yes, there was corruption, blah, blah, blah. And now the Iraqis now file a complaint to the ICJ, or somebody on behalf of the Iraqis files a complaint on the ICJ, and they put out all the dirt on the U.S. and Iraq. How about Libya? How about Afghanistan? How about all of South America? How about all that the ICJ is doing nothing but fielding complaint after complaint against the U.S. empire, the UK, Belgium, you name it, that they got to expand the court just to deal with the with the lies, the murder and theft. You see what I mean? The U.S. can't stand that. They can't deal with that. So now they have been put in a double bind. They've been put in a quandary, a catch-22 situation. If, in fact, they walk away and say, we will not respect the authority of the ICJ, the authority of the UN to rule over us when we or one of our tentacles, extensions, bases, whatever you want to call Israel, violate the law, then their hypocrisy and contradictions are bared out for the world. And might I add, they can never use that tool again. You see, if they say we won't respect it against us, can they go after China with it? Can they go after Russia? That is a tool that they no longer have. So for them to say we won't respect the findings of anything of the UN means they can never use the UN again to go against anyone. They have invalidated any arguments they have for the UN, and countries who are under sanctions, such as North Korea, can then say we want to approach the UN. The sanctions were brought forth, they were put forth by the United States, and we're suffering for these sanctions. And the United States has now demonstrated that they will not respect the outcome of the UN. So we're asking that any sanctions, any actions, think about this, any actions previously taken on behalf of the United States in a way that hurts any other country, any punitive actions that arose as a result of the United States should be thrown out as of this date, because the United States has now demonstrated that they will not accept the rulings of the United Nations when it comes to them. So therefore, they have invalidated all claims that they have made as a result of the United Nations. Or at least this. If they don't argue, they can ask for a retrial. You know what I'm saying? If you say, well, at the time the court made those decisions against you, North Korea or whatever, the claims that were made, we're going to accept that they were valid. So therefore, we're not going to vacate the findings, right? But what North Korea and other countries can say, well, fine, you ain't going to vacate the findings. But here's what we're going to argue then alternatively. This is the argument I would make. Alternatively, what we're going to argue is this. We now know that the United States is not acting in good faith. We are asking for a retrial, right? The complaints, the claims that the United States made against us when the UN decided to sanction us, we're saying we now know that the United States is not a good faith actor. That being said, give us a retrial. Allow us to reopen that case, to go back to what the United States argued, to force someone other than the United States to make that argument and give us an opportunity to defend ourselves again. That's the argument I would make, and I think it's a strong and powerful argument. Bottom line is this. The fact that the fact that South Africa went after the U.S. in the ICJ exposes the U.S.'s attitude towards the ICJ and whether or not the U.S. is a good faith actor moving forward. Right now, remember, the ICJ came out and said, look, effective Friday, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that to Israel, right? A number of things. They made some judgments. They said Israel, well, here's what they said. The United States and Israel are subject to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and to international law. And based on that, we're going to make a finding and you got to go by it, right? Immediately, Israel said, no, we don't. The United States didn't say, well, they've come out and said that, and they've said that we don't, that basically they took an action, basically saying we're cutting funds to the Palestinian relief and humanitarian aid. So they made it clear. Now we're not going along with the rules. We don't buy it. At this point, the question is what happens as far as the pushback, and how are countries able to use that in order to further weaken the U.S. empire? I think we'll see that. We'll see more complaints from people who are hurting. I think right now it's a perfect time for Syria to make their move. It really is the perfect time for Syria to make their move, because they have some credible arguments against the U.S. empire, and they should go to the ICJ right now and say, okay, we're in. I think Iraq people should make arguments. Iraq, Libya, all of the actions that the U.S. still has taken right now, people need to go to the ICJ while people have their eyes on the ICJ. Because when somebody went in and made that complaint, it would be finally, you know what it would be? It would be a fact, empirical, epistemological argument, right, versus the U.S. empire's narrative. That's what we'll see, which is going to hold up. One of them is holier than the Pope, holier than Swiss cheese. The other one has strong data. I think that's what we need to see. And I think that's the direction we're going in. They're in a world of deep and serious trouble, my friends. The rules-based international order. Let me just say this. Hamas, I'll go back to what I've said. They punched a hole below the waterline, my friends. If you know anything about boats, they punched a hole below the waterline. There's too much coming in. The U.S. empire ain't going to be able to get out of this one. Let's take a quick look. See whether or not we have any super chats. I got to get my act together because I got to go on George Galloway in a half an hour. I'm going to be on the mommy of all talk shows. All right. Please donate to UNRWA, help Gaza survive, stop Gaza starvation by the U.S. and Israel. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Habib. Let's keep going. Super chat. Danny says, Adam Curtis, you need to get him on this show or spectrum of shows, sir. Adam Curtis, huh? Somebody email me, garlandin@gmail.com. Email me with who this Adam Curtis guy. I don't know who he is, but I want to find out. garlandin@gmail.com. The way to get promoted in DC imperial circles is by writing essays and think tank policy papers. Blinken and Sullivan and DC are DC language bots. Cheap. Oh, yes, absolutely. Way to go there. Anas Bellion Jihab. Are you doing real good with that one, am I? Let us continue. How about we next go to Herbert Harris. My dear friend Garland, I must argue that the UK and the US economy will fall because it doesn't have the commodities to keep their industries and economies producing. How can the UK sustain themselves? You are 100% correct. I agree with you. They're going to fall. The US does have the commodities. The US can survive better than any place in Europe, like the US, Russia, Canada. Why? Because they can grow food. If you can grow food and you can produce energy, you can survive better than somebody who can't do those things. Europe's screwed. So the U.S. can survive better, but the U.S. is the heart of a very sick and twisted ideology. So we'll see how those things work out. Andrea says, how far will the U.S. go to support Israel? Will they defy UN Council ruling? I think so. Will they implicate themselves in certifiable international crime? Yes, they got no choice. But that's fine. We know they're good. They're already doing it. So let's let them do it. What we want is, if they're going to do it, we want them to do it out in the open. We want the rules-based international order to be in the open. That's what this is doing. Choosy heretics choose. Carnation revolution now. There you go. Thanks a lot. I like that. Jara says, great analysis and observation. Thanks, Jura. Jura. Isn't that what they say in the military? Jura. Rock fan? James Boyajian gave me a tip. Thanks a lot, James. Rumble. You know what? I got to remember something. There's such a thing as Rumble rants. So let's see if there are Rumble rants. Let's go here. See if I can figure that out. Oh, here's a Rumble rant. Hooray. I don't want to miss that. Quote Garland Nixon, January 2024. The U.S. is playing whack-a-mole with the world. Thank you very much. Wow, a Rumble rant. I'm so excited. And there's how many people on Rumble? 97 people. This is exciting. I'm really trying to get myself stuff going on Rumble and on Rockfin because, you know, look, it could toss me right out the window any given day on YouTube. And okay, so here's what we want to do. All right, let me kill this on Rumble. Everyone, please, a couple of things. Numero uno, you see everything, whether it's going across the bottom. We got Patreon, we got PayPal, we got Buy Me a Coffee, which is always great because you can just go there and it's like, buy me a coffee. Boom. How much? $5. How many do you want? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Buy Me a Coffee is great. And additionally, don't forget this with Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to do just like Patreon, you can become a subscription and do it monthly. Buy Me a Coffee is absolutely great. PayPal and all that stuff. Patreon, and of course, my Cash App information is there. Go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon and Rumble, both of them, and become a member. Doesn't cost anything at all to become a member. I show all of my information on Rockfin is on for members. Some of it is members only. If you want, is for some of it is subscribers only on Rockfin. If you want to become a subscriber, just simply do it's $14.99 a month, I believe, to become a subscriber. So if you can afford it, fine. If not, just become a member in case they throw me off of YouTube. You'll know where to find me between there and Rumble. And most importantly, share this on all your social media platforms. You know, I ain't on Twitter and they thrown me off, but at any rate, share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. And make sure everybody, we got 890 people. We need to make sure we have 890 likes. Peace. I'm out. And once again, got 2:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be on the mother of all talk shows. I'm out.